If you weren't born in Scandinavia, you have in all likelihood never heard of this movie. The sad thing is, you probably haven't, even if you are. The Glassmaker's Children is one of those movies that people seem dead set to forget it even exists. Until recently, I've only ever seen it on VHS. It's no longer sold on DVD, and I don't think there are any plans to give it a Blu-ray release. And yet, the first time it occurred to me that hardly anyone knew this movie, I was floored. Because I couldn't imagine growing up and not having seen it. But the more I dug into it, the more I found this pattern repeated itself even beyond its original premiere. Hardly anyone saw it in cinemas, despite critics at the time giving it nothing short of stellar reviews. And during production, everything seemed to work against it. The premiere was delayed for more than 2 years after filming wrapped up, due to budget restraints and creative differences between the film's producer, Anders Birkeland, and its director, Anders Grönros. Grönros was an auteur in every sense of the word, who would not compromise his artistic vision for the film, and he would not let up production until he was satisfied. It went so far that a completion bond company had to forcefully step in and take over the editing for the film, but even then, Grönros would not be swayed. He even threatened to burn the footage if he wasn't given more funding to finish the film the way he wanted it. And that prompted the company to forcefully remove the reels from the studio. That's how passionate he was about this film. The Glassmaker's Children is a classic children's novel written by Maria Gripe. As a child would see it, it's the story of how the young Klas and Klara are taken from their parents into the household of the Lord and Lady. Their father is a glassmaker and very poor, while the Lord and Lady are rich, and the Lord wants nothing more than to fulfill the Lady's every wish. But the Lady has stopped wishing, and no one seems to really care about Klas and Klara. It may seem shallow and even lost, but beneath the surface it deals with the confusion surrounding the heart's desire, the nature of good and evil, and the repercussions of blind selfishness, and the many faces of it. The novel was written in a very simple way to imply the themes it touched on rather than spell it out, so it wouldn't be too cerebral for the young children it was aimed at, but they could discover it when they were older. Anders Grönros seemed the perfect man to adapt the story for the big screen, considering he had already received great critical acclaim for adapting another novel by Maria Gripe, Agnes Cecilia. I imagine then he felt he was justified in his hunt for perfection, but the question is whether or not it was worth it. And there is another question that begs to be answered, especially if you're an old-timer watching this. Why am I being so serious? I usually try too hard and fail at being funny. Well, I wanted to try something different and see if I'd still be interesting. The very first thing the film does is thank all of the people involved in its production for making the movie possible. A list I am sure Anders Grönros felt more than a little petulant about. True enough, these companies provided financial backing for the movie, but the budget Birkeland had presented them with only worked under the best of circumstance. Almost immediately Grönros went over budget, and he didn't announce this until after filming had wrapped up, at which point the production had already been a hassle and a half. Whenever they ran out of reel, the sets would go unused for weeks, and during this time they still had to pay for all the equipment and all of the personnel, and Grönros even brought in a second camera team to get all of the footage he needed. Grönros expected the companies to politely wait for their compensation, but of course they wanted a return on their investment. This put the production in development hell for 2 years, and by the time it premiered in February of 1998, it had cost these companies more than twice what Grönros already owed them. And by autumn of that year, most of them still hadn't made their money back. If everything had gone smoothly, the film could have premiered Christmas Day of 1996. So to say that this couldn't have been possible without these people, it really must have stung. Thankfully, the movie quickly makes us forget about the doldrums of poor business management and sweeps us away to a mist-laden land of mystery and shadows. The witch, Flaxa Mildväder, tells us the story of how it all began in the great house in Wishing Town, where the Lord and Lady lived. The Lord's greatest joy in life was to fulfill the lady's every wish, just to hear her utter 2 small words. Thank you. One day the lady said she wants children, and so the Lord sent the coachman to find 2 children, a boy and a girl. Flaxa Mildväder knows this because she weaves carpets, and in the pattern she can foresee what will happen to the people in her small village. But it's little more than nuance and faint hints, and now all she can see is a great darkness spreading for the weave. By her side is her familiar, the raven Kloke, and to help her see what she herself can't, he flies to the wisdom's well that he may know. But no eye can withstand looking too deeply into the wisdom's well. This is a very ominous way to set the movie up, especially for a kids' film. But I beg you remember the many grim fairy tales you read as a child, only to then grow up and realize they were pretty bestial at times. You just didn't realize it because you were a child. You had no frame of reference. I mean, when the hunter cut Red Riding Hood and Grandma out of the wolf's stomach, you didn't get a graphic description of all the blood and viscera or how much pain the wolf was in. It was over and done within a sentence. The book works the same way, dealing with some very heavy themes, but presenting it in a very simple and straightforward text. And Grönros felt the best way to adapt this story for the big screen was to be honest to the spirit of the book. And this brings me to the first theme of the movie concerning the nature of wisdom. Kloke has a day's and night's eye. The day's eye can see the future and everything that's bright and good in life. The night's eye can see the past and everything that's dark and evil. To be wise, you need to be able to see both the brightness and darkness of life. You can't just pick and choose one or the other, you need to be able to see both. So imagine then how Kloke, as he stares down into the swirling waters of this Nietzschean abyss, he loses his night's eye and spends the rest of the movie as a crowing, gaggling fool. It sounds like a heavy-handed metaphor, but it's a very memorable visual. Let me stress again, this is a kids' movie! With that said, I don't remember being too bothered by it as a kid. Maybe I was the first time I saw it, but I'd like to argue this movie helped mold my interest in the morbid by not shying away from it, while every other kids' media that I can remember did. Even so, as far as frightening visuals goes, this film ain't even close to peaking yet. With the dark and uncomfortable backstory established, the night falters to the day's light, and the story as it is begins. I'll just take a moment to admit I am deliberately misrepresenting the title of the film. On IMDb it is accurately translated as The Glass Blower's Children, but taking my sense of humor into account, I would not be able to make this review seriously if I called it that. Another thing worth acknowledging is the music. The music was composed by Johan Söderqvist, who had previously worked on Agnes Cecilia, and it consists of mostly glass and string instruments, but what these instruments are I couldn't tell you. I don't know if it's a crystal glass ensemble or if it's a glass organ, I don't know, but it's an incredibly emotional soundtrack that can invoke feelings of hope and glory just as much as it can loneliness and misery. It genuinely makes me cry, that's how hard it hits. Also, for one reason or another, a lot of people involved with this film got burned by it. Söderqvist is among the half who weren't. He went on to produce background scores for films for many years, including to the original Let the Right One In. I would say they remind of each other, but this is much more simpler and much more ethereal, and I'd argue it holds more weight. Maybe I'm a nostalgic fool, but to me, this is the superior soundtrack. Playful, joyous, and carefree are the lives of Claes and Clara, with nothing to bar them from play and mirth under the open summer sky. The sun bathes the land in its warm bliss, and the songbirds chuckle in the trees, calling the children into the forest. The young Clara heeds their calls, despite her younger brother's protestations. Their parents have told them not to go near the house at Rackare Hill, but so long as they don't pass the wall, Clara is sure they'll be fine. Clara is played by a very young Jasmine Heikura, who grew up to be a proficient voice actress. She's kind of like Sweden's answer to Tara Strong. She was Hermione Granger in the Swedish dub of Harry Potter. She was Kari, Sora, and Yolei in Digimon Adventures. She was Mina in Sing. She was Boots in Dora the Explorer. And before this film even, she played May in My Neighbor Totoro. And for a bit of national pride, she was Annika in Pippi Longstocking. By stark contrast, Claes is played by Oliver Peldius. Remember how I said a few people got burned by this film? The only things I could find him having worked on after this film was Babar, King of Elephants, and a dub of Kiriko and the Sorceress. Oh, he also was a background actor in Lisa Ekdahl's music video for Now or Never. And I can only speculate why that is. The most recent thing I could find about him is he either attends or attended the Academy of Music, but I don't know what Academy of Music that's supposed to have been. And like I said, I can only speculate why that is, but if I had to guess, I think it may have had something to do with his performance in this film.
Varför är ögat så konstigt? Har ni tappat det? Nej. Jo.
Complaining about a child's ability to act is a bit dickish, I know. But standing next to Heikura, it's kind of difficult not to compare the two. Even as a child, she was an amazing actress. She could emote, she could intonate her voice, she could act with her entire body, and standing next to her, Peldius just looks disconnected. I will be fair and say that it's entirely possible that Grönros asked him to play Claes that way. There are, in fact, several scenes that suggest Claes may be on the autism spectrum, expressing his emotions through actions instead of showing them or verbally communicating them. But considering this is the biggest production Peldius ever was a part of, and he was cast opposite Heikura, it does come off as if he can't act. Kloke and Flaxa Mildväder's powers are well known in the village, even among the children. Clara tells Claes how Kloke can only see what's bright and good in life with his one eye, when suddenly he starts crowing, and in the distance a thunderous rumbling shoots towards them. A speeding black omnibus barrels past them on the gravel road, sending the raven into absolute hysterics before it takes flight and chases the children away from the wall and back to the safety of their homes, before he turns about and returns to the house at Rackare Hill. At first glance, this contradicts what's been established about Kloke's eyes. If he really can't see evil anymore, he shouldn't have been able to pick up on the omnibus driving by. The way I figure it works is his eyes allow him to see the details of what's good and what's evil. And now that he has lost his knight's eye, all he can really see is this, well, darkness obscuring everything it touches that evil is concerned with. Or at least that's how I figure it works. It's referenced in one way or another in several bits of dialogue throughout the film, but if you want it to be, I can concede this is a plot hole. And finally, we are introduced to our narrator, the witch Flaxa Mildväder. Flaxa Mildväder literally means flutter mild weather, which sounds like a flatulent pony. Let's ignore that. She's played by Lena Granhagen in one of the very few roles she has had on screen, being a devout theatre actress. She actually was a very prominent part of Swedish cinema in the late 60s, but since then she has only appeared on camera maybe 4 or 5 times, making Flaxa Mildväder all the more unique as a character. She has no mirror images in other media to break the illusion. I for one have never seen her in anything else.
Jag varnade dig. Skulle behövt ditt nattöga nu, Kloke, nu när mörkret närmar sig. Hör du det?
A fantastic performance, slightly hampered by a comedian pretending he's a raven. Yeah. Kloke is played by a team of trained ravens from Czechia, as well as a couple of puppets, and voiced by Johan Ulveson. Because Kloke talks every time he's on screen.
Tiden krymper.
Vi ska vara glada så länge vi kan. Jag är glad. Jag är glad.
Which is not how he was portrayed in the book. For one, he didn't speak nearly this much, but he was also much more eloquent, making elaborate statements and carrying conversations with Flaxa. He didn't sound like a cartoon character. With that said, he is supposed to have gone slightly mad since losing his knight's eye, so it works for what's intended, but I suspect this is one of the battles Grönros lost in the editing room. Still, even if portraying a mad raven isn't the height of acting, Ulveson is a terrific actor in his own right, with a lifelong career in primarily comedy. Personally, I know him the best from a 2010 production of Fair and Warmer, where he played the equivalent of Billy Bartlett. Back to the movie. The billowing darkness rattles Flaxa, and she curses Kloke's half-blind state. She can't discern the coming evil, more than glance at where it will touch, as the swirling pattern seems to pull the outlines of 2 children towards its center. At the same time, Claes and Clara have joined their father in his workshop, and Claes stares spellbound at the crystal bubble growing at the end of the blowpipe by the force of his father, Albert, played by Stellan Skarsgård. And it is Stellan Skarsgård. It's not Bill, I double-checked. Also, the glass in this film was designed by Gunilla Allard and custom made by the renowned glassmakers of Orrefors. Witchery and spells are not to be played with, and Albert tells his children as much. Only a crazy would willingly live at Rackare Hill, where evil folk were once executed. More heads have rolled down that hill than apples from the tree. To not let his children dwell on such a sour note, Albert tells them how this next piece is going to be the most beautiful thing he's ever made, a truly blessed piece, and he shows this by throwing the blowpipe into the air and catching it before it smashes on the ground. Both Claes and Clara laugh, and Clara begins to dance, but in her fervor, she becomes careless. See, this is what I meant about Claes's character. He's completely transfixed with one subject, his father's glassmaking, and he hardly ever shows any emotion except for when a glass breaks, more specifically his father's glass, which will be important later. Albert is a compassionate but stoic man, and driven above all by the beauty of his craft. In that, he's unable to care for his children beyond working to provide for them. So he sends Claes out to be comforted by his mother Sofia, played by Pernilla August. There are a lot of stage actors in this film, and Pernilla August is no exception. But she has been in a few movies as well. Most notably, she had an important but minor role in a multi-billion-dollar franchise you may have heard of, where she gave birth to the Dark Lord in a galaxy far, far away. She played Shmi Skywalker in Star Wars The Phantom Menace. It's just a bit awkward to bring that up, when reviewing a movie set in 18th century Sweden. As the night draws in, the darkness thickens about the glassmaker and his children. Albert finds Sofia crying by their bed because she's so lonely. Albert spends every day and every night by the furnace in his workshop, and every time he's finished a piece, he has to make something even more beautiful than before, and something more beautiful after that. He's leaving her alone every day, all the time, always.
Du är inte ensam eller du har ju barn.
Barnen, de är väl inget sällskap heller, de är ju mest i besvär.
This is an important difference from the book. In the book, they do say these exact words, but there is much less build-up to it. Gripe describes their home life, with Albert working all the time, Sofia taking care of the children, and Sofia feeling lonely, and then she says those words, and that's it. Here, the characters interacting with each other fleshes out the scene and adds much more depth to it. Plus, there is that small gasp of horror as soon as the words are out of her mouth and she realizes what she just said.
Förflugna ord som Sofia inte menade, men ändå skulle få ångra.